when you lean into what you have been, whatever tools you've been given, sure, that enables you to speak to serve others. But if you do that in the right spirit, you are learning as much, if not more, than anyone else. You are. It opens up a dialogue by which you might have more to discover about what God is doing in the world than those you went on a mission to preach to.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Jeffrey Overstreet is a novelist, a creative writing professor, and a film critic at the intersection of art, faith, hope, and love. Much of what I know about film comes from his essays about movies and his interviews with movie makers at Christianity Today and his old website, Looking Closer with Jeffrey Overstreet, as well as his earlier book, Through a Screen Darkly. Jeffrey's new book, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema, is a memoir and essays about film. He's described it as a celebration and an expression of gratitude for the films that shaped my young imagination, that helped me recognize the glory of God's work in the world that God loves, and that then set me free to learn to love the world, the whole world, myself. If you've ever been moved by a movie, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jeffrey Overstreet. Jeffrey Overstreet, so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast, and I'm excited about your new book, The Lost and Found in the Cathedral of the Cinema. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege and an honor to be here.
So, tell me what Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema is about, why you wrote it.
Well, it's been almost 20 years since Through a Screen Darkly was published, which is hard to believe. But that book came about because as a film critic for Christianity Today, I had a daily dose of rage mail from readers of Christianity Today who were very, very suspicious of the arts and and worldly culture. They thought I was leading generations of Christians into temptation and corruption and toxic material by looking at cinema through what I believed was a Christian perspective, looking for beauty, looking for truth, looking for excellence. And they kept telling me I needed to accept Jesus as my personal savior because I found anything redeeming in a movie like, Pan's Labyrinth or Harry Potter or something like that. But then at the same time, I would also get angry letters from Christian couples who were offended by the fact that I had some mixed feelings about Titanic. I mean, how could I possibly have mixed feelings about a movie as romantic as that? And somehow my eternal salvation always got brought into the conversation. And I kept finding that a simple email was not enough. That was just throwing fuel on their fire. But if I could divert their attention to a life story about growing up in Christian education and learning to love literature and learning to love poetry and learning to love Shakespeare, and then realizing that the stories of the world that we are drawn to are stories of beauty, are stories that resonate with truth, are stories of good versus evil, and the wages of sin, and the freedom that comes with the truth, right? And so I felt like I needed to tell that story, but that's not an email, that's a book. So Through a Screen Darkly was an attempt to justify the ways of art to worried Christians. And it turned out there was such an appetite for that conversation that I ended up traveling all over the world talking to Christians who wanted to sort of sort through these things and meeting some of these more contentious people face to face, but also meeting people who were just so thankful to find other Christians in the world who were interested in art, interested in this conversation. And through that experience over many years, I started finding that I was tired of the format of the Friday opening day movie review, because when people talked to me about movies, they were talking about their lives. They were talking about the most unexpected films that had spoken to them and inspired them with new questions and that had helped them see God in a new way. And boy, was I up for that conversation. So I started turning my writing about film toward more creative nonfiction variations, different kinds of essays where I would tell stories from my life, point to scenes from the films, and that would open up conversations that a typical review couldn't. And that eventually led to teaching about creative writing, teaching film interpretation. And eventually I was just so impatient to share what I was finding in some of these movies, how these movies were affirming, enriching, expanding my faith, even in the work of filmmakers who would be the last ones to call themselves religious and who would probably be alarmed by the conversations we were having about their films. I started looking at this list of films that I just kept coming back to, or that people kept bringing back to me. And then I had to start narrowing it down to a book-length document. But this is a collection of those adventures, of those deep dives, of those conversations, and how the films just keep opening up, keep showing me new levels of revelation. And when I looked at just the diverse variety of films, I thought, wow, this speaks to the fact that this is not just about a preoccupation with the genre. This is not about a preoccupation with Hollywood. This is an adventure around the globe of cinema over many years across many cultures. And it started to feel almost like Pentecost, like I am hearing the gospel in all these different languages. I am encountering Christ, sometimes in disguise, in all of these different creative expressions. And so we've got everything from Pinocchio to My Neighbor Totoro to The Black Stallion to Moonrise Kingdom to Do the Right Thing to The Tree of Life. And so it really is just kind of a best of collection of those conversations that I've had with moviegoers and churchgoers and students.
Yeah. By the way, you didn't start teaching until after Through a Screen Darkly came out?
You know, everything seemed to go backwards. I was working in marketing at Seattle Pacific, and I was doing my creative writing, my fiction writing, and my film reviews, all of that stuff in the evenings in my quote-unquote spare time. And that started to take off on both tracks, the fiction track with my fantasy novels and the film and faith conversation.
Aurelius Colors was such a great book. I love that book, by the way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that also 20 years old next year. That and Through a Screen Darkly came out the same year. My life changed pretty dramatically there.
I did not realize it was the same year.
Yeah. I remember. I would go to speak somewhere, and there would be people there who wanted to talk about both things, and it was kind of hard to jump back and forth between the subjects. But the theme of Aurelius Colors, the theme of that series, really tracks so well with this, because that's a story set in a fantasy world about people discovering that the mysteries of art, the mysteries of beauty, offer us vocabularies for the truth that nothing else does, that we can't reduce to paraphrase what God is up to in the world. And so we have to speak in these wildly imaginative ways. And that's very much the central thread of those fantasy stories, Aurelius Colors through the fourth book, The Ale Boy's Feast. And so to me, they're very complementary, but it takes a while. That's a big conversation. But I am eager to get back to fantasy writing, because the film thing took off in such an unexpected way. I mean, I felt like I'd been working on the garden of my fiction writing, and that I had this little potted plant of film criticism on the windowsill. And it was the potted plant that erupted with a global conversation. And I've been trying to get that under control and tend to that for so long that now it's time to go back to the garden. But yeah.
Well, I hope you are able to return to that garden. Anyway,
thank you.
But that's not what we're here to talk about right now. I want to talk about. I want to get back to Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema. You say early on, you speak of art setting you free from misguided religion.
Yes.
That's an interesting claim. I want to hear more about that. What do you mean? Yeah, there you go. Tell me
It's
about
a
that.
claim. It's a claim that I'm sure deeply disturbs a lot of people I grew up with. But I think if they were to really pay attention, they would find that what I mean is that just as Jesus is constantly pointing us outward to the revelation of God, just as the psalmist is pointing us to how the heavens declare the glory of God, and day by day pours forth speech, and the heavens declare his handiwork, right? So the mysteries of art, the beauty of art, which is a reflection of all of that beauty in the natural world, which is a reflection of God's work in creation, that full, attentive devotion to those things will lead you to the source of that beauty. It's like the great Christian mystic Simone Weil said, Jesus wants you to prefer the truth to him. That may be the most controversial statement that I quote in my art classes, but there's more to it. She says, Jesus wants you to prefer the truth to him because before being Jesus, he was Christ, and Christ was truth. And as long as you are pursuing truth, you will eventually find you have fallen into Jesus' arms. And it sounds like a contradiction, but it really aligns with my experience in that I was given a certain picture of Christ. I was given a certain picture of Jesus that aligned with one particular community, their interpretation of the Bible, their way of life, and their sort of withdrawal from the world to live in their little bubble of interpretation and experience. But as I was growing up, the tension between that and what I saw happening in Jesus' teachings, what I saw happening in almost any memorable story in the Bible, all of them are about being called out or being sent out, whether it's leaving slavery in Egypt or being sent in the Great Commission. God always has us on the move. You know, in the story of the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appear to Jesus, and the disciples that happen to be there to witness this are amazed, and they think, this is where it's happening. Let's build you a temple right here. And Jesus is like, nope, we're moving on. He's always against saying you've arrived. He's saying to have arrived is to realize that you have never arrived, that I am always leading you further up and further in, to quote one of our favorite people ever, right? George MacDonald. So, to me, when I started realizing that anything true, anything beautiful, that's God's territory, and that God so loved the world, you know, then I think I'm supposed to so love the world as well, and to follow these trails of beauty and truth, not just so that I can use them to preach the gospel, but so that I am constantly humbled and awakened to greater depths of God's glory and love. And so that's all very abstract. The book gets this into much more, puts our feet on the ground and walks us into a movie theater and says, you know, we are drawn to this film. Why? Well, there's something beautiful here. There's something true going on here. Whether it's the fairy tale of Pinocchio or the mysticism of My Neighbor Totoro, or the sort of primal beauty and the profound silences of that boy on the island with the black stallion. All of these things are, you know, we are drawn to these things because they are speaking to us. They have things to reveal to us about ourselves, about the world, and about the source of all love and grace. So each one becomes a meditation that would then bring me back to the faith of my childhood with new perspective. But this is the thing, is if you really open yourself to what God has for you, you will change. Your vocabulary will change. Your experience will change. And when you come back to the faith of your childhood, when you come back to the communities of your childhood, you are going to look and sound different to them. You are going to have seen things they haven't seen. And that leads to a lot of conflict. That leads to a lot of suspicion. I think maybe this has something to do, with what the scriptures say about a prophet not being popular in their hometown. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, but I'm saying when I came back with these sort of journals of what I had experienced, seeing these films, talking with people about them, revisiting them, looking at the films that inspired them, I came back with stories to tell, with a testimony that sounded foreign to the people I'd grown up with. They were like, well, you're different now. That's because you've been out in the world. So when I say it freed me from misguided religion, I'm saying it fed that appetite I had to answer this call of going further up and further in, to follow God on the move rather than plant a flag and say, this is where God lives and he's not out there anywhere else. Don't go out there. That just doesn't align with the teaching and example of Jesus or the early church.
Yeah. So. I often say, if you believe that the world is shot through with meaning, that the universe is shot through with meaning, then it's an act of faith and obedience to receive, to give an account of what you've seen in the trust that the meaning will be there.
Yeah. And I mean, if we think about the movies and the stories that we love most, I don't know about you, but almost all of them that were foundational and formative for me in my early childhood were stories about going out, even against one's own will, right? I mean, in the community of friends that you and I share, the Rabbit Room and Hutchmoot communities, we are always going back to Bilbo Baggins not wanting to leave his home in the Shire. But as soon as he's out there and he climbs to the top of the tallest tree and looks about and sees all those butterflies, he wonders if he'll ever see his snug hobbit hole again, and he wonders if he actually wants to, right? Yeah. Same thing with Watership Down. The rabbits have to leave their home because they start to wake up to the danger, and the rest of the people around them cannot cope with the fact that there might be danger coming. So there's a whole sort of central chapter in this book about Watership Down and how that story resonated with me at 10 years old. I knew I needed a bigger world. I knew that staying here is not what God wanted for me. But everybody around me wanted to stay in the Warren and deny that there were as many problems inside our community as there were outside. Yeah. And the rabbits go looking for that place that resonates with them, that they feel like they were made for. And it's not an easy journey, and it makes them vulnerable, and they pay heavy costs. But that is the call. That is the journey of faith. And Star Wars, this poor kid who works on a moisture farm. I mean, that's got to be the worst job for a teenager ever.
Yeah, right.
Looks up and feels called to join the battle of good versus evil, right? And I was called to Star Wars because I could feel that Star Wars was calling me out. And and you could even point to the Muppet movie, and it's the same thing. Kermit looking skyward from the swamp, feeling this call whenever he sees the natural beauty of a rainbow. And the next thing you know, he's on this journey to Hollywood to make millions of people happy and bring as many characters along with him as possible in this extraordinary, gracious, generous, inclusive community where everyone he meets is another reason to love and celebrate the world. That became a gospel vision for me. And so that sort of set the template. I mean, any movie I walked into, if I found beauty and truth there, if it resonated with me, I was going to interrogate that. I was going to investigate that and find out what exactly God was doing there. Yeah. And
a really good example that you offer in your book that really resonated with me. I think you and I are about the same age. You were talking about in Sesame Street. Since we're talking about Muppets,
Yeah.
In Sesame Street, in church you heard about every tribe and tongue and people, in the new heavens and the new earth. You didn't have a good picture of that in your own relatively homogenous world. And in Sesame Street, you saw a picture of not every tribe, but more tribes than you were used to, and that gave you a vision of what the Book of Revelation was talking about. When we have all that's also the prophets, all the nations streaming in to the same place.
Yes,
and I as a child, that also that was my Sesame Street was my little window into a world of sort of pluralism that I didn't have a whole lot of other examples of.
Yeah, I am so grateful that I got to grow up with Sesame Street and with Fred Rogers. Both of those shows, and this is an on-ramp to the movies, right? Because the Sesame Street leads you to the Muppet Show, which leads you to the Muppet Movie, which is filled with cameos from movie stars who you get curious about. Everybody from Richard Pryor to Steve Martin to, of course, the king of Hollywood, Orson Welles. And Cloris Leachman right outside his door at the front office, right? Then I get curious about them, and I start looking for them and recognizing them in other things. But I was allowed to watch Sesame Street because Sesame Street was focused on literacy, focused on reading, focused on the alphabet. But it appealed to us, I believe. It appealed to all children because it did not feel preachy. It did not feel didactic. It turned every occasion into an occasion of play, by which we would learn, rather than the other way around, where a skit would start and it would be like, "Uh-oh, we're here to learn something, so let's find a way to make it entertaining." Which, by the way, I got to say, that tactic was very familiar to me in the church. We need to teach them the right answers, so let's find a way to try to make this fun. Oh, how about flannel graph, or something like that. I wanted to go home from Sunday school and listen to my Disney records or watch The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, because that led with joy and curiosity and play. And on the other side of that, you would look back and go, wow, I really learned something there. So I've got a whole chapter devoted to The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and how the lessons at the core of those stories were the very lessons that I think my Sunday school teachers needed to learn, were the very lessons that we were neglecting in the church, especially when it comes to lessons about fear. Yeah. But on the Sesame Street account, I saw the Muppets themselves, which were such a diverse community. It was such a great, playful way of celebrating just how many kinds of people there are in the world. But then the show itself was designed to reach children who were not being ministered to, who were not being attended to by the mainstream culture. I mean, the designers of Sesame Street very, very directly aimed Sesame Street at inner city black children. Mm-hmm. And so I saw children on television that I did not see in my very, very white Christian elementary school, middle school, high school. I did not see in my very, very white Baptist church in Portland, Oregon. And I just saw a world that was so different and so much more interesting and so much more diverse. And I didn't really see a line between the Muppets on the show and the people on the show. And that increased this sense of conflict within me, because the people I would see on Sesame Street who I liked were the people that my neighbors would associate with the bad neighborhoods in town.
Yeah.
You didn't go to those parts of town because those parts of town were dangerous. Those parts of town are where you were making yourself vulnerable. And of course, then Jesus is quietly whispering to me, if you love me, you will go to the poor. If you love me, you will go to the neglected. If you love me, you will go to the outcast. You will go to the immigrant. You will go to the refugee. Well, those were the bad neighborhoods, quote unquote, according to my little bubble.
Yeah.
And so the tension between what Sesame Street was really doing. Yeah, I mean, I was learning the alphabet. You know, I wouldn't be a writer without that.
Yeah.
But I was also learning to love my neighbor.
Especially as a little white kid, you had lots of opportunities to learn your literacy skills. Right?
Yes.
That wasn't. I mean, something you said a minute ago that I want to push back on. You said, you looked at Winnie the Pooh, you watched Winnie the Pooh or read or whatever, and you enjoyed it, and then you look back and said, I learned something. I don't know that I ever looked back and said I learned anything from. I wasn't able to say I learned something from Sesame Street. I did learn a lot.
Yeah.
But it was shaping my desires.
Yes. I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
In the mid-'70s, there's so many images of New York City as this hellscape of high crime and dirtiness. And then there's this other little picture of, I don't know what neighborhood that was supposed to be depicted, but somewhere in New York City that I was old enough to have heard that was a hellscape that I would never want to visit.
Are you saying Sesame Street isn't a real place?
But
can you tell me how to get to?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, nobody ever really told me how to get there. They just kept asking questions. But I remember feeling that tension of this seems like an okay place to. These people seem okay, or more than okay. I would like to visit these people and know these people.
Yeah,
and that was not. I have learned the value of diversity. It was. I would like to. This, it was shaping. I never looked back and said I learned something, and yet I learned plenty.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Is that I realized I learned how much I learned by writing about it now at this point in my life.
Right.
I look back, I'm like, wow, this was really shaping what I believed, what I cared about, and what I wanted. I wanted a diversity of community, and now I believe if the kingdom of God is really happening somewhere, then you are going to see people of all kinds drawn to it, not just a certain kind of people. Yeah, and in that, I have a chapter that's an open letter to Jim Henson because I just wish I could sit down and thank him for hours and hours and hours for all that he did. But there is I quote Harry Belafonte in there from a great book called Jim Henson: The Works, where he testifies to how that initial outreach to black children in New York. Because of the patience, because of the creativity, because of the love and the play, that just translated across cultures all over the world. And he will tell you about, if you go to some of the poorest places in the world, you find a love for what Jim Henson did and a joy that was made possible because of what Jim Henson did, because of that. And that feels to me like a model for all of us. When it comes to how we use our creativity. And another thing I come back to in this book is that I was taught to always, you take what you're good at and you use that for the kingdom of God. You go out and you show them. And what I find again and again with the example of Jim Henson and so many others is that when you lean into what you have been, whatever tools you've been given, sure, that enables you to speak to serve others. But if you do that in the right spirit, you are learning as much, if not more, than anyone else. You are. It opens up a dialogue by which you might have more to discover about what God is doing in the world than those you went on a mission to preach to or whatever. So, increasingly I found, that this world was not just a mission field, but that going out there, that is where God was going to break down my limited assumptions and show me what more was possible.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said about the movies of the 70s and the grittiness of New York, though. I remember growing up hearing that, the movies are so dirty and so filthy. I mean, just look at all these movies about crime and darkness. Yeah. But it was this path through Winnie the Pooh and the Muppets, all the way to Martin Scorsese and Taxi Driver, that gave me the tools I needed to watch a movie like that and realize, this is about a very, very violent, depraved world and some very violent and depraved people. But I would come away from the movie now with some sense of why things were so bad there. And I could look at a violent character like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver and not just be alarmed at his violence and at what he resorts to respond to the chaos in his world, but I can also see how our society has failed him, how neglected he's been, how none of the things he should have had as a child or as an adult are being offered to him. And he's reacting like any healthy person would in a situation like that. He's reacting with desperation. So that gave me a way to start appreciating and understanding even those movies that had seemed so scary and so alarming and which I had been warned away from as a child. So I think that's another aspect of this is it doesn't just lead you to the joyful, playful movies. It leads you to the truth that can be found in those horror movies, really.
Yeah. I have to say, I never got around to, I've never come around to be able to appreciate or get much out of that era in the 70s, those movies like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, that there was something just off about the story in there that I still maybe I need to read more of your film criticism, because I've never been able to get there on a movie like Taxi Driver. It's almost like they were experimenting with a new kind of storytelling that I was glad when the experiment was over.
Yeah, these were films that came out of the Vietnam War, that came out of a time when so many people were looking to the authority figures they were supposed to trust. They were supposed to be able to rely on. They were supposed to believe these people have our best interests in mind. And then they would look at the practicalities of their day-to-day and say, what's going on here? Yeah. I mean, I voted for you for this reason, and you are not delivering. In fact, you are not even interested in me. And then they'd get angry. And when people are hurt, they start raising their voices. When people are hurt and they feel no one is paying attention to them, they start reaching for blunt instruments to lash out. And that's tragic, but there's fault all over the place there. And I think so much of the movies of the 70s is looking into that sort of quagmire and saying, this was a time when the very ideals being sung about and preached about in America were a lie. And as the scripture in Ephesians tells us, we should have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. That was very impressed upon me as a kid. Have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Don't pay attention to any of this. But there's more to the verse. Have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead expose them.
Yeah.
Well, that changes things. Now we have to think more like a doctor. Have nothing to do with cancer, but study cancer.
Yeah.
Find out where it comes from. Yeah. Find out what we might be able to do about this mess. And that feels like a call to the artist. Yeah. Have nothing to do with the depravity and the evil you see in the world, but pay attention to it, because there are people God loves there. And a lot of what you are seeing is a reaction to their neglect. Yeah. To the fact they've been forgotten, to the fact that they've been left at the mercy of the elements.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there are any mid-century short story writers who sort of did this. Maybe Flannery O'Connor.
How did I know that we were going to end up talking about Flannery O'Connor? I mean, yes, here's to her.
Yeah. Okay. I want to touch on, maybe spend some time with The Tree of Life, Terrence Malick's movie.
Terrence Malick, yeah.
And I just love that movie so much, in spite of it being so incredibly slow. And I set my teenage kids down to watch it one time and realized just how slow it was when I was watching it with a teenager. But there's, I love that movie so much. And one thing I want to get to is you make an interesting case that it was a bit of a sort of a poster movie for, Christians, evangelical Christians, and Christians of all stripes sort of claimed this as now finally there's a movie that that we're looking for, and you make the case that it has more antecedents than many of us were aware of, including me, by the way. But also, before we get into that, I love an observation you make early in the book is that, you talk about the difference between paying attention to light as distinct from paying attention to what light reveals. And we all look around the world and we see what the light reveals to us, and the movie maker pays attention to the light itself. I'd love to hear you sort of riff on that idea a little bit, because I found that very, what's the word I'm looking for? It got me interested.
Okay. Well, in the book, we start with that. I start by talking about how both in the context of church and in the context of movie theaters, two different kinds of temples, so to speak, how I came to realize that we were always talking about the light. Maybe I should start paying attention to it. And it became kind of enchanting to pay attention to what light is doing in a cathedral, or what light is doing in a movie theater, and how in some ways it accentuates the difference between us and the pageantry, but at the same time it reveals the correlations between the two, and how relevant those things on the screen, or at the front of the sanctuary, or in the iconography around us, how relevant those things are for us. And then grabbing hold of that, I sort of move on this journey, this life story through the movies. But to your question, you first mentioned the Tree of Life, so we're going to work a little bit backwards here. The Tree of Life is sort of I don't want to say a culminating work for Terrence Malick, but it is a pivotal one for him, because throughout his career from the 70s, from those messy movies of the 70s, to the release of The Tree of Life in 2011, he was telling stories about American history, and really questioning, really challenging a lot of American assumptions, and working his way, I believe, toward making The Tree of Life. He was talking about that movie from the beginning. He used to call the project Q, and then eventually it became The Tree of Life, because that's his life story. I mean, it's a very autobiographical film. But it's not like most autobiographical films. It's not just a story about here I am as a kid and here are my parents. It starts closer to the present, where the family is haunted by a loss, and he is thinking back through the hardships of his childhood, the difficulties of his very authoritarian father and his grieving mother, how he was drawn to be like his dad, to be contentious, to be unfaithful, to be violent. And then he has to contend with the loss of his tender-hearted, gracious, more sensitive brother. And this all happened to Terrence Malick, as far as I can tell from what little we know about his life story. So this is a movie where he's working through all of that, but he's doing that with his very distinctive style, which is a very image-focused way of communicating. It's not this happened, then this happened, then this happened. The camera, I like to think of the camera in Terrence Malick movies, I like to think of his style as sort of like if you mounted a GoPro on the shoulder of the Holy Spirit, because the camera is as interested in the tree in the front yard as it is in the children playing under it. The camera is as likely to look down the street at a gust of wind moving through the leaves as it is to look at mom and dad fighting in the kitchen. It's as interested in how the light is striking the sprinkler in the neighbor's yard as it is in this man's soul searching about the loss of his brother. And the more you watch Terrence Malick, the more you have to eventually surrender to his his thesis, which is things mean things. This matters. What is happening with the light in the water from the sprinkler is speaking to us about what is happening in the kitchen. When we, he will film a fight or a disagreement between a mother and a child, and then he'll cut to a shot of a waterfall. And the more you attend to that, the more you realize that is commenting on this. These things have things to say to each other. And a lot of people think Terrence Malick movies are really boring because they don't have a lot of experience with poetry.
Yeah.
But the more you start watching that and talking with other people about it, and that is the essential missing piece of the movie-going experience for most people.
Yes, that's a great point.
Sharing impressions, sharing the things that stood out to us, what images were most impressive to you and why, the more we start connecting those dots. So when I show the Tree of Life to a class, they leave the classroom looking very confused and just like, why did you put us through 3 hours of that? But then 2 nights later, I asked them, what was your favorite image? Or what was a moment that confused you? And we all start sharing our impressions. And in that crowded room, I start learning all kinds of things I haven't noticed before. They start learning things from the 30 times I've seen that film. And slowly we start interpreting it as a poem rather than just as a narrative. Yeah. We start interpreting images rather than just dialogue. Yeah. And
it feels a little like The Wasteland in that regard. That's kind of this poem of images.
Yeah, there's so much classical poetry alluded to through the Tree of Life, but there's also this essential perspective that what is happening on the micro level is what is happening on the macro level. He will cut from a sequence of a meteorite hitting a planet or a star or a galaxy taking shape, and then he will cut to a mother tending to a wound on a child's foot, and you'll realize the meteor striking the planet, that bizarre shot of a dinosaur lying on the beach who has a gash in its side and it's just moaning in despair, and then the shot of a child harming another child. These are all connected. They are all speaking about the woundedness of creation, the longing we feel for healing. And then you start to realize that all of this is modeled on the book of Job. Yeah. That Jack O'Brien, our protagonist who is grieving the loss of his brother, his initials are J-O-B. And he is asking God, how could you let this happen to my family? And God says, well, why aren't you asking, how could I let this happen to the world? How could I let this happen to the cosmos? And God basically shows up, like he does in Job, and says, let me remind you of this cosmic story. And we realize that whether we're looking at something that hurt us when we were 3 years old, or whether we're looking at climate change, or whether we're looking at violence in the cosmos, all of these things are representations that things are not supposed to be this way. Yeah. But then you look closer and you see, and yet all things are being reconciled. All things mean things, and we wouldn't be longing for reconciliation, for healing, if that was not written into our DNA, as this is the way things are supposed to be. And even in the way the film is made, it reflects this, because the great special effects artist Douglas Trumbull, when it was time to show us the grandeur of the cosmos and the creation of the universe, rather than just resorting to digital animation, started doing experiments basically in like petri dishes with chemicals. He built this lab where he would like pour solutions into other solutions and then film them with these tiny cameras. Really? And when you take those images of what's happening at the microscopic level and blow them up onto a big screen, audiences are completely convinced that they are watching the formation of the universe. They believe.
I didn't know how he did that. I wondered what that was, what I was looking at when he. I thought maybe it was images from the Hubble or something.
Yeah, and some of them are Hubble images, but there are some images of what look like the Milky Way, sort of taking shape in the universe, and it's literally milk being poured into a solution and filmed in a dark room. Really? It really is the cream swirling through your coffee. Huh. And I think that's like practicing what you preach. That's showing us that the light has something to say about all of this.
Yeah. I speaking of light and Terrence Malick, there's that moment in his in To the Wonder, where the French woman. We think of France as a place of beauty and culture and all that. And when the French woman comes to Oklahoma, and she sees the what do you call it? The carnival rides.
Oh yeah.
Carnival rides, and which I'm inclined to think of as tacky and in poor taste. But to see it from the perspective of somebody who's never seen that before, it was so incredibly beautiful. That light of a carnival ride at night really sort of turned something upside down for me.
Yeah.
That celebration of that kind of light too. That very human, that very man-made, artificial kind of light.
And that was the first time he had made a film in a contemporary context. And it was even for people who were already devoted to Malick's filmmaking. I remember very distinctly a shot of a gas station at night that was just so enchanting. I mean, it just felt otherworldly. It had that kind of magic hour glow to it, and it felt like a sacred place. And it is. I mean, through his eyes, they're all sacred places. But this is where the danger comes in, and you sort of referred to this in your question about Malick. This is where the danger comes in, is that he is so good at this, and he brings enough familiar vocabulary for evangelical Christians into what he's doing that a lot of evangelical Christians find his cinema and they sort of awaken to how cinema can work and what the language of images is, and that's great. I mean, that's a turning point for a lot of people. But then he ends up sort of being exalted as this singular saint of the art form, and he is one of the greats, absolutely, inarguably. Just look at his influence. I don't know if there's an American filmmaker who's had more influence on filmmakers around the world. But I am so grateful for his films because they, as I started reading criticism of them going way back, it led me to so many of his influences. And some of those filmmakers have become just as influential for me. I mean, I talk a lot about Andrei Tarkovsky when I'm writing about Malick, and I mention him a few times in the book. Krzysztof Kieślowski. There are direct connections between Kieślowski's films and Malick's films. When we get that creation of the cosmos sequence in the Tree of Life, the music we are hearing comes from the composer Zbigniew Priesner, who writes these gorgeous sort of symphonic works. And the music Malick chose to score that creation of the cosmos scene is music that was written specifically for the memorial for the filmmaker Krzysztof Kieślowski. Wow. Priesner had written the music for Kieślowski's great films, the Three Colors trilogy, Blue, White, and Red. Blue is, sometimes I say that's my favorite film ever made. And Priesner had to write music for that film that would represent the hope of the reunification of Europe. I mean, that's an assignment. If a filmmaker comes to you and says, I need you to write music that in the movie has been written by the world's greatest composer, and it has to represent the reunification of Europe, you've got your hands full. And Priesner somehow, as far as I'm concerned, achieves that. I mean, I'm completely convinced by that. And I think Malick was too. I think he heard that, and then he thought, well, what can I do for music for the creation of the universe? Oh my goodness, Priesner actually wrote music to celebrate Kieślowski, and it's so beautiful to me, it's the score of creation. And so that, then I find Kieslowski, and then I find Tarkovsky, and then I find Terrence Davis, whose films have a very Malick-like language before Malick.
Yeah.
So
I really appreciate that reminder. So when I saw that movie, I said, I've never seen anything like this. And I appreciate the reminder that doesn't mean this has never been done before. It just means it's the first time I've ever seen it done.
Yeah. Yes.
And so that chapter invited me to explore some things that I didn't know to explore before. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and again, I don't in any way mean to diminish what Malick has done, but I get nervous when I hear some voices in Christian media talking about him as the end-all and be-all, and there's really, once you get to Malick, you've arrived. And we're sort of back to that again, right?
We're back to that idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, we have arrived at the end of our time. So we can both continue to explore out, but this particular conversation needs to stop here.
Yeah.
But thank you. This has been so fun. I've always loved hearing what you have to say about things, and so you've made me want to go watch a lot of movies that I don't already know.
Well, to be continued. I mean, anytime we open up a subject, questions as big as this, I mean, the time is going to fly because we're having so much fun. But it's just so great to talk with you again, Jonathan. And I'm just so grateful for your faithfulness to this project. I mean, your podcast now has such an impressive archive, and you are teaching so many people so much. And so I'm so glad the world's a better place knowing you're here in this post. So it's an honor to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I feel the same way about you and your work. So see you soon. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.